The Devizes to Westminster International Canoe Race is an ultramarathon that takes place every Easter weekend and is the longest non-stop canoe race in the world. It was started in 1948 by the Devizes Scouts as a challenge and has grown into a major international event. The 1984 event saw another record entry of over 200 crews. Each paddler is fitted with a wristband for identification at the checkpoints along the way.
Tickets for our special St. George's Day concert next Monday are available from the usual agencies. Are you in the front cockpit?
Strict rules require each crew to carry compulsory safety kit, which includes sleeping bags, tracksuits, a torch, and emergency rations of chocolate and water. Junior crews can only race in stages over 4 days, but senior doubles crews race the race non-stop, paddling and running continuously throughout the day and night until they arrive at Westminster 125 miles later. Paddlers can start any time from 7 a.m. on Good Friday and must time their start to make sure they hit the last tidal section at the optimum time to benefit from that tide. 7 a.m. was the earliest allowed start. That gives you the benefit of more daylight hours, but the crews will lose some time at the end when the Thames is not at its strongest flow. Several top elite crews were on the start line, including the independent crew of South Africans Viljoen and former DW winner Tim Cornish, up against the defending champions Donovan and Kennedy from Ireland, Goodman and Shillingford from Reading, and Heath and Robertshaw from the Royal Engineers. The race is 125 miles long and includes 76 locks. Starting in Devizes in Wiltshire, the race travels down the Kennet and Avon Canal until it joins the River Thames at Reading, and then follows the Thames to Westminster in the heart of London. Tim Cornish and Viljoen, Alan Bennett and Ronnie Thorogood, and the crew of Price and Lund and all but one of the other top contenders opted to start at 7 a.m. Serious title contenders Heath and Robertshaw of the Royal Engineers chose to start at 4:30 p.m. They were aiming to go for the next tide to try and get a better flow on the River Thames. The rest of the field set off at their chosen start times. Tim Cornish and Viljoen race into an early lead over Alan Bennett and Ronnie Thorogood, and then the crew of Price and Lund. Meanwhile, the crew of Higgett and Shillingford had chosen to delay their start by 2 minutes, hoping to catch the early starters and then sit with them, which would have given them a key 2-minute advantage. Cornish and Viljoen come into the portage at Burbage without another boat in sight. They've earned a solid early lead. After 14 miles, Cornish and Viljoen reached the first portage at Wootton Rivers with a 5-minute lead in the bank. From here, there are 55 portages over the next 42 miles. Hignett and Shillingford are alone in second at the portage at Wootton Rivers. Cornish and Viljoen portage at the lock at Great Bedouin after 21 miles. Interestingly, Cornish is now at the front of the boat, part of a calculated strategy to rotate the driving responsibilities to ease the strain of this ultra-endurance event. Bennett and Thorogood in second at Great Bedouin. "35 miles in and Cornish and Viljoen reach Newbury, Viljoen back in the front of the boat. There are a number of low bridges like the one they're approaching. You have to judge it carefully to make it under comfortably. If you get it wrong, you can get stuck, and that can result in a very cold swim. In the junior DW race, which is held over 4 days, the first stage ends here. Cornish and Viljoen push hard between Newbury and Thatcham, extending their lead. Now they're racing their own race, watching time and pacing and monitoring their bodies, all the time racing on the cusp of a record-setting pace. Cornish and Viljoen go through Thatcham after 38 miles. This is familiar territory for Cornish. This was his hometown before making the move to South Africa. They're followed by Bennett and Thorogood, and then the crew of Hignett and Shillingford. Then comes Price and Lund. "55 miles into the race and Cornish and Viljoen arrive in Reading, where the canal joins the Thames. Although they're almost on record pace, the 55 miles that they've paddled on isn't really affected by flow. But once they get to the Thames, it becomes clear that there's not enough current to stay in touch with the record that was set during a much faster flow. They're putting on spray decks here as the portages are now more spread out, and there could be waves from the pleasure boats you find on the Thames. The crews of Alan Bennett and Ronnie Thorogood and Hignett and Shillingford pulled out of the race some time after reaching the Thames at around the halfway mark. Cornish driving the pace from the front of the boat as they reach Sonning Bridge on the Thames.
Come on, Tim. Come on, Brian.
The Sonning Lock after 57 miles, another portage, a leg stretch, a chance to replenish juice, get some food, and then another rotation of the steering responsibilities. Hambledon Lock at 64 miles is just over halfway. Cornish and Viljoen, well supported by their seconding crew and spectators alike, enjoying the good Easter weekend weather. This portage takes the cruise around a weir that is a popular venue for slalom paddlers. "12 miles further downstream, Cornish and Viljoen reach Cookham Lock after 74 miles in a time of 10.5 hours. This is about 40 minutes off the record pace, confirming that the flow is just not enough to keep a record-setting pace on the Thames. Another swap of seats as Cornish moves into the front cockpit for the 10 miles to Romney Lock. By now, the daylight hours that they had opted for with the 7 a.m. start are fading fast, and as they approach Romney Lock after 84 miles, they still have a huge lead. But the nature of this race, with crews opting to start at different times, means that you cannot get a clear picture of where you are relative to the other elite crews until the last boat is in and the timekeepers have done their maths. The iconic Windsor Castle and a welcome landmark for the weary paddlers as they approach the old Windsor Lock, marking 87 miles into the race. This is well into the endurance zone now, where mental strength takes over from the months of training. In the fading daylight, the exhausted Cornish and Viljoen reach Belweir after 90 miles. They've banished all hopes of records, but retain their relentless solo pace at the front of the race. Cornish getting seconding from his wife Sally, her stepdad Keith Donkin in close attendance as well. Still 35 miles in the dark to go. By Chertsey Lock, with 96 miles under the belt, night has fallen and it's pitch dark by the time Cornish and Viljoen glide down the Thames into the finish at Westminster. But they had to wait until the following day to find out that they had won the race. Heath and Robershaw of the Royal Engineers, who started later to meet the second tide, finished in second place, 30 minutes behind Cornish and Viljoen. Third place was taken by Price and Lund from the Havering Racing Squad.